All right, welcome everyone. So this week's Parsha is Beha'aloscha, and it's a long one and there's a lot here, and I'm going to give you a little heads up. I'm going to get sidetracked. See, this time I'm telling you in advance. Sometimes I do it without telling you, but it's all going to be good Torah, so that's the main thing. So Beha'aloscha, we'll start with a little bit of the overview of the Parsha like we like to do, and let's get there. Beha'aloscha starts with Hashem telling Moshe to instruct Aaron and to teach about the menorah. That's the very first thing that is taught in this week's Parsha. Speak to Aaron, reading from the beginning, chapter 8, verse 1 and 2 and on. Speak to Aaron and say to him, when you kindle the lamp towards the face of the menorah, shall the 7 lamps cast light. So the menorah of the Beis HaMikdash had 7 lamps, unlike the menorah that we use on Hanukkah, which has 8 lamps. And all of those all of the flames are going to be facing the middle one. So it's a little bit interesting. The Torah doesn't start off the Parsha by saying, speak to Aaron and tell him to light the menorah, which is how you might think that it should start off, light the menorah. Now, when you're lighting the menorah, set him up that all the ones on the side are going to face the one in the middle. So rather, it just starts off talking about the focus of the angle of the lights, which is interesting. So there's 2 lessons that the commentators take out of this. One of them is that the light went inwards and it was aiming kind of towards that center one. And the message there was that the menorah was not there to give light to the Beis HaMikdash. That wasn't necessary. The Beis HaMikdash didn't need artificial lighting. So by facing it inwards, the message was, this is not about light. This is not just a convenience chandelier. This is a mitzvah that's being performed. As a matter of fact, the commentators say that in most people's houses, I guess we would do better to envision this in times before electricity. If you wanted to have a lot of light, as much light as you can during the day, so they would angle the windows so that there would be a larger outside of the window to capture as much light as possible and then kind of like focus it into the house. But in the Beis HaMikdash, it was actually the opposite. The inside was narrow and the outside was big, and the purpose of it was that there was a spiritual light in the Beis HaMikdash, and the Beis HaMikdash didn't need to collect sunlight from outside. On the contrary, it gave light to the outside world around it. So that's one idea that they talk about. And the other thing that I thought was interesting is, I forgot who says this, but he says that the right side of the menorah, the right lights represent spirituality, and the left side represented physicality. And the message here is that both of them should be facing the center, meaning to say facing Hashem. So the message in that is that everything that we do should be directed to Hashem. And of course, that's simple to understand when we're doing spiritual matters, when we're doing mitzvahs. But even when we're doing things that are not mitzvahs, we should be channeling everything to be doing for the greater purpose of serving Hashem, even if at the moment we're doing something technical or something mundane. It could still be done with proper intentions. And, for the purpose of giving the people, all of us, the ability to serve Hashem. So that's a little bit of the idea that everything's facing the center there. So then the Torah talks about, the next topic is the Levites, the Leviim. So in previous weeks, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about when the Kohanim were, basically ordained, when they became Kohanim, and there was this ceremony that was done. Now we're going to talk about the Leviim. So the Leviim are, often looked at as like assisting the Kohanim. They were the assistants, which has an element of truth in it, that they did service in the Beis HaMikdash, but not the primary service that the Kohanim did. One of their most important roles was singing. Their avoda was singing, and the Mefarshim here again talk about how important singing could actually be in service of Hashem. Singing that is done in a way that brings us closer to Hashem could be a really, really powerful tool. I don't know if any of you heard this in Philadelphia the other day on Sunday. There was a massive gathering of Torah scholars. And basically there was an event in a stadium. 20,000 people came to this stadium, packed out crowd, and they were celebrating essentially Torah scholars, people who live in the New York area and primarily focused in New Jersey, and Beis Medrash Gavoa, the biggest yeshiva in America, which is located in Lakewood, New Jersey. And they were celebrating what they were calling Adirei Torah, the warriors of Torah. And that is the thousands of people who are living simple lives to be able to afford, to provide for their families, but also be able to learn Torah all day. And that's what they're trying to celebrate, that we all value them. And even if we can't do that, we're not in a position to do that, we want to show credit to them. But why am I saying this? So one of the most powerful things, I was watching the video, like a live stream of it this morning, was the singing. I mean, there's nothing like, I was only watching this on video. I can't imagine even being there, but singing with 20,000 other Jews is such a powerful experience. It's incredible. I don't know if any of you have ever been to like the Siyam Hashas, like any of these huge celebrations when you have so many Jews together and you're singing meaningful songs of serving Hashem. It's really could be a really incredible spiritual experience. And the same with Kumsitz as well. We've done that a little bit in the Kollel every once in a while. Just getting together and singing could also be a very powerful way of connecting to Hashem. So that's a lot of the focus of the mission of the Levi. And then we talk about the Karban Pesach. So the Karban Pesach, the sacrifice that was brought on Pesach, was a very important fundamental mitzvah. And it was actually so important that everybody would come and there would be like this annual pilgrimage to Jerusalem to bring the Karban Pesach. And it was so important that if somebody wasn't able to do it, he had a second opportunity to make it up. And that's called Pesach Sheni. A month later, if somebody wasn't able to make it the first time, he would come a month later and he would bring his sacrifice. Then just shows the importance of it. We're not usually given that opportunity, like, oh, we missed a mitzvah, no problem, do it a month later. So I think that shows a little bit of the significance of that. Of course, without a Beis HaMikdash, we don't bring the Karban Pesach anymore. So, okay, that's an overview of the beginning. Now, talk about another idea. So chapter 9, verse 1, this is at Shlishi in the Parsha. So the Torah talks about the travels of the Jewish people throughout the desert. Okay, so some context here. Okay, first of all, fun fact, the Torah isn't written in order. So you might be a little puzzled if you've been following along over the last months, really, and weeks, because sometimes it seems like we're talking about a time period where the Jews are like almost going to enter Israel. And sometimes it sounds like they just came out of Egypt. And really, there's been so much since they came out of Egypt, right? They came out of Egypt in Sefer Shemos, 20 Parshias ago. And yet in this context, we're only talking about the second year after the Exodus. So basically, sometimes the Torah is written a little bit out of order. So at this point in Parshas Beha'aloscha, the Torah states clearly where we are in Jewish history. Vaydaber Hashem al Moshe b'midbar Sinai. Hashem spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the second year from the Exodus from the land of Egypt in the first month. Okay, so you might know in your mind that the Jewish people wandered in the desert for 40 years. But the reason that wasn't plan A, that was plan B. Okay, plan A was not that Hashem takes the Jewish people out of Egypt and then goes on a 40-year hike and then enters Israel. That wasn't the plan. But unfortunately, the Jewish people sinned. And it was sins that caused this punishment of wandering in the desert. And then that original first generation that sinned died before being able to actually enter the land of Israel, etc. So right now we're in the beginning. It's the second year, and we're setting the stage for how traveling was done. So they brought the Karban Pesach, and then it says, let's see what verse this is, chapter 9, verse 16. All right, so on the day on 15, actually, the day the tabernacle was set up, the cloud covered the tabernacle. That was a tent for the testimony. And in the evening, there would be upon the tabernacle like a fiery appearance until morning. So there was a pillar of fire that would illuminate the night. And then during the day, there was a cloud that would lead the Jewish people. And this was their GPS. This was how the Jewish people knew when to go and when to stop. And the Torah explains exactly how it worked. So I'm in chapter 9, reading from 16 and on. So it would always be, the cloud would cover it, and an appearance of fire at night. And whenever the cloud was lifted from atop of the tent, afterwards the children of Israel would journey. And in the place where the cloud would rest, there the children of Israel would encamp. According to the word of Hashem would the children of Israel journey, and according to the word of Hashem would they encamp. All the days that the cloud would rest upon the tabernacle, they would encamp. Okay, I'm going to continue reading, because part of what is surprising here is how much detail the Torah is getting into and how repetitive this is about to get, okay? And we're not done yet, okay? In case you haven't gotten the point in how this travel protocol worked. Reading on from 19. When the cloud lingered upon the tabernacle many days, the children of Israel would maintain the charge of Hashem and would not journey. Sometimes the cloud would be upon the tabernacle for a number of days. According to the word of Hashem, they would encamp, and according to the word of Hashem, they would journey. And sometimes the cloud would remain from evening until morning, and the cloud would be lifted in the morning, and they would journey. Or for a day and a night, and the cloud would be lifted, and they would journey. Or for 2 days, or a month, or a year. When the cloud would linger over the tabernacle, resting upon it, the children of Israel would encamp and would not journey. But when it was lifted, they would journey. According to the word of Hashem, they would encamp, and according to the word of Hashem, they would journey. The charge of Hashem would they safeguard, according to the word of Hashem through Moses. Okay, quite a mouthful over there. Quite a mouthful. Quite a lot of verses that are talking about this. So I want to try to understand what we're learning from this. So there's all this details. There are so many verses that are basically saying the same thing again. We would have understood this without all of these extra verses. And we know that the Torah doesn't write any extra letters. Rav Hirsch asks another question. He says, this is incredible how sharp Rabbi Hirsch was in like small nuance in the Torah. So he says, there's a praise for the Jewish people that is said here. What is the praise? That the children of Israel would maintain the charge of Hashem. What is the Hebrew of that? 19. The Shamru b'nei Yisrael es mishmeres Hashem. Okay, that's a compliment. The children of Israel, they would essentially obey the guidance of Hashem. But when does the Torah give the Jewish people this kind of compliment? When the cloud lingered upon the tabernacle many days, the children of Israel would maintain the charge of Hashem and would not journey. It's not when the Jewish people traveled that Hashem said, oh, look at the Jewish people, they're listening to me. It was when they stopped that Hashem says, oh, wow, look at the Jewish people, they're listening to me. Why is that such a praise? Most people would be happy to rest, essentially. So if you want to put a nuance, a focus on praising the Jewish people, shouldn't that be when the Jewish people needed to schlep and pack their bags? And, who knows how long it took them to prepare to move again. Okay, I'm overwhelmed. I'm moving in 2 weeks to a new house, and I'm overwhelmed at how much work is going to need to go into that. So this happened constantly. They would be getting up and packing all their bags. So it sounds like Rav Hirsch is basically suggesting that it sounds like that the challenge the Jewish people had was not traveling, was resisting their urge to travel. It was when they rested. So what's up with that? Why is that? You would think that the urge to rest would be resisting the urge to rest would be more praiseworthy, right? You have to go and you want to rest. That's impressive. But if you want to rest, what's the big deal? So basically, Rav Hirsch explains that the Jewish people were not traveling for the sake of traveling. This is before the sin of the spies. The sin of the spies, the Meraglim, is what caused a heavenly decree that there should be a 40-year process of wandering the desert. That didn't happen yet. This is prior to that. So where are the Jewish people going? They're not on a hike. This is not about getting in shape. This is about going to the land of Israel. They've been in Egypt for hundreds of years. And now they finally got out of Egypt. They received the Torah, and now they're heading to the promised land. They're heading to the Holy Land. So they wanted to go fulfill the mitzvah of going to Eretz Yisrael and being able to serve Hashem properly. So since they were so tempted to go and do these mitzvahs, that's why the harder thing for them was not to go. They were excited to go. The harder thing for them was to stop, was the time that they were being delayed from going somewhere, from going to the land of Israel. That's what Rav Hirsch says. Now, another part of this that is worth mentioning is the length of the stop was very unpredictable. And maybe that's why the Torah actually reiterates this a few times. It says sometimes it would be a day and a night, and then they would go, or sometimes 2 days, or sometimes a month, or sometimes a year. So you can imagine what that was like. They're traveling through the desert. They're told, okay, the cloud rested. Jewish people, we're here for a break. We're going to set up the camp. And they went through all that work, and it could have been the next morning that the cloud lifts, and that's it. We move on. So that shows an incredible amount of, emunah in Hashem and following, the ways of Hashem blindly. And they didn't know if they'd be there for a day or a month or a week, or even only one night. And this was a very strong lesson in humility and, submitting ourselves to Hashem's will that the Jewish people learned. So they went through all of that effort every time they needed to encamp, no matter how long it was going to be. So that shows that they were just there to listen to the word of Hashem. So I think that's also another lesson here in what they did, that the difficulty could have been in the stopping and not just in the traveling. So I think maybe the takeaway message here is we can be inspired by our ancestors by how much they were willing to go with the plan of Hashem and accept whatever Hashem's plan is, no matter how difficult it was, no matter how much work that involved. They did that, again and again. And I think that's a message we can take from that. So sometimes Hashem guides us in a way we don't understand. Sometimes Hashem tells us to stop, right? Let's keep in mind the Jewish people were going to do a mitzvah. They weren't going to fulfill their own desires. They were going to do a mitzvah. Sometimes Hashem says, no, we're not going to do that quite yet. I have to share a story that happened today. And really, this has been on my mind all day. So I want to talk about it a little bit. So this morning, there was a bris scheduled that was going to take place from a family here nearby. And we don't have in-house mohel here. So I made arrangements for a mohel to come in from Atlanta to do the bris. So everything was in place. The mohel came in last night, and we had a whole gourmet meal set up, and people gathered, and we had a minyan for morning prayers for Shacharis, and everything is all ready to go. Everybody's gathered, and the mohel goes and checks on the baby, and the mohel says there's not going to be a bris today. There was a minor complication with the baby. Baruch Hashem, nothing terrible or terribly dangerous, but still something that made that it would not be the right decision to go ahead with the Mila today. So as you can imagine, this was quite a shocking turn of events. There were 20, 25 people gathered here. The mohel had drove 6 hours, and took a full day to come all the way out here. We had a full catered meal and everything. And it was like, okay, what do we do now? Like, nobody was expecting this. So we decided we were going to go ahead with the meal anyway, because it was going to be still a seudas mitzvah. And we spoke some words of Torah to help create a seudas mitzvah, a meal that was still revolving around the mitzvah. And the rabbi said that we were able to give the name to the baby, even though normally the name of a baby is given during the bris ceremony. In this case, the bris needed to be delayed a bit, but it's still okay to give the name of the baby. So we're able to give the name. We were able to, make the best of it. but it was tough. I'll tell you, it was tough. It's been on my mind all day, for so many people everyone who gathered there and thought they were going to be part of a mitzvah, and the Moel who drove in, and of course the parents of the baby who were excited to have, it was their first son. They were excited to have the opportunity to perform this mitzvah. All the people who were gathered, the people who were going to be honored with various roles during the Milah, it was definitely a big letdown. And I think just thinking through this message from the Parsha, which I learned later today, I felt like this was a little bit comforting for me, because sometimes Hashem says that what I want you to do for me, I want you to do, in the way that he's going to guide us. And we thought, and we very much hoped that it was going to happen today on the 8th day, the ideal day for a bris milah to take place. But Hashem decided that no, today wasn't the right day. And now we were all being tested. Were we gonna, follow the lead of our ancestors in the desert and say, okay, look, Hashem, we wanted to do a mitzvah, but apparently you want the mitzvah to be done a little bit differently, and this is not the right time to do that. So if it's not the right time to do that, we'll wait until the right time. So I think I found this idea to be pretty comforting in that area. I saw another kind of Dvar Torah. My brother actually told me. I want to find the pasuk. Hang on one second. Akev. Okay, here it is. So this is in Parshas. I don't know. I don't remember what Parsha. It's in chapter 26 in Bereshis. So I'm going to read a pasuk. Gor ba'aretz hazil ve'eya imach v'avarechacha. This is Hashem talking to Avraham. Stay in this land, and I will be with you, and I will bless you. Ki lecha u'lezarecha etein es kol ha'artzas ha'el v'akimos yisashur shenishpat l'Avram avicha. No, actually, it's Yaakov. Hashem talking to Yaakov. Stay in this land, and I will bring your descendants to the land of Israel, and I will fulfill the promise that I made with Avraham. And I will increase your children like the stars of the heaven, and I will bless them with many, many decisions. Why? Okay, what is the source of all this blessing? Ekev asher shama Avram bekoli v'yishmar mishmarti mitzvosai chukosai v'sorosai. Because Avraham listened to my words and watched my watchings and fulfilled my mitzvos and followed my Torah. So that sounds very, very repetitive. And the question is, what is it that Avraham fulfilled? Okay, so I'll read the English of that verse. Because Abraham obeyed my voice and observed my safeguards, my commandments, my decrees, and my Torahs. Okay, so I'm just reading here from Rashi. What did Avraham do to be deserving of such blessing? This is important, because if Avraham received such incredible blessing from fulfilling particular areas of the Torah, we want to tap into that, right? We want to cash in on that kind of blessing. So what are the areas that he excelled in? So Rashi explains, Shama Avraham bekoli. Avram listened to my voice. Rashi says, when I tested him. Avram went through various hardships and he got through it. That was one source of merit for him. The Yishmar Mishmarasi observed my safeguards. What does that mean? He says that he established secondary safeguards to protect him from violating prohibitions of the Torah. So, for example, the Torah says when it comes to morality, there's forbidden relationships. So forbidden relationships have certain protocols and basically certain things that we can do that are prohibited, but Avraham made extra fences to protect him from even being close to a situation where he might come to violate. So basically, okay, so number 2, making an extra safeguard to protect from violating a prohibition. Mitzvosai, what does it mean by mitzvos? That is mitzvos that Avram fulfills that are common sense. So you might say, okay, what do I need the Torah to tell us not to steal and not to murder? It's common sense. It's not nice. It's not in line with the law, the rules of society to do that. So Hashem is saying that even though, by the way, society, of course, changes. There are many things that the Torah says are prohibited that society also agreed was prohibited. And then as society progressed and changed, society changed its mind and says, no, that's okay now. But the Torah still says it's prohibited. But even if society frowns on it, like let's say murder, I think is pretty, at least in most societies or in the Western world, murder is frowned upon. So even then, it's a mitzvah that we're fulfilling. So when we don't murder, we get a mitzvah. We're doing something here according to the word of Hashem. Chukosai, what does chukosai mean? Dvarim sheyitzar v'umasayim eshivan aleim. Chukosai means averos, prohibitions that people don't understand, and maybe even people make fun of or like ridicule. And the examples he gives is the prohibition against eating pork, eating chazer. Nations of the world will be like, what in the world is with your weird dietary restrictions? Why can't you eat pig? You want to tell me don't steal because that's the morally proper thing to do, but why in the world do you care which package of meat you take off of the grocery shelf? Or wearing shatnez, the prohibition of wearing wool and linen woven and stitched together in a single garment, is something that people can ridicule. Like, oh, well, seriously, what does the Torah care? What kind of material your clothing is made out of? So by fulfilling mitzvos that we don't understand, that also brings a big source of merit and blessing. And Torasi, the last one, that is Lahavi Torah Shebal Peh Halachal Moshe Sinai. That is the fulfillment of the Torah Shebal Peh. That is the Torah, that the oral law that is not written, that Hashem still gave the Jewish people, that Hashem gave to Moshe. So interesting. Avraham fulfilled the mitzvos that Hashem told Moshe thousands of years later. Okay, that's a topic on its own. Avraham lived way before Moshe, so that, or not thousands, but hundreds of years later. So that is definitely a whole topic on its own. So these are things that could bring us a special merit. Then I want to read for you another perspective. That was Rashi. What does the Rashbam say? The Rashbam says a different understanding of what these merits are. What did Avram do right? So he says, Yishmar Mishmarasi is Mila, circumcision, that Avraham gave Yitzchak a bris Mila. And then mitzvosai, he says, is mitzvahs shmona yamim, diksiv kasher tziva oso elekim. Mitzvosai refers to performing the bris milah of Yitzchak on the 8th day and following the word of Hashem, meaning that Avram got a mitzvah for doing the bris on the 8th day. So the question is, I don't get it. There's 2 mitzvahs. One mitzvah is to do the bris, and one mitzvah is to do the bris on the 8th day. Like Hashem thought, like there's one mitzvah, do the bris, and the time to do it is on the 8th day. This commentary is the Rashbam seems to be suggesting that Avram got 2 different categories of reward. One for doing the bris, and one is doing it on the 8th day. So this idea I heard is that imagine what it was like for Avraham Avinu. He was given the mitzvah of Mila, and he's excited to be bringing his children into the treaty, into the bris, the covenant between us and Hashem. And he finally has a baby boy after so many years of not having a baby boy. He's ready to do the bris milah right away. But then Hashem says, no, wait 8 days. What was Avram's reaction? Inside, he's probably, are you serious? I've been waiting decades and decades to finally have a son, and now you're telling me to wait another 8 days? So the fact that Avram listened to the word of Hashem and pushed beyond his internal desire to do this mitzvah as soon as he possibly can, that was an extra schlitz to him. So, of course, I thought this was also like, very comforting for today's story. There was a bris that was supposed to take place. and the baby wasn't up to it and it wasn't able to take place. And we didn't get to fulfill the mitzvah of the bris today, but we did get to fulfill this extra mitzvah of doing it when Hashem tells us to do it. So usually it's 8 days. And today in this particular story, the message was this baby's right time for bris is not 8 days. It's going to be later than 8 days, in this particular case, but still we're going to follow Hashem's guidance. So I think overall, the message here is sometimes we want to grow closer to Hashem faster. We're doing things for the right reasons. We want to go close to Hashem. We want to connect to Hashem right now. We want to do it right now. We want to do it quickly. We don't want a long process. We don't want to be delayed in any way. Sometimes we have all kinds of, spiritual commitments we want to take. And in some circumstances, Hashem seems to send us the message that right now is not the time to do that. And of course that, that's not like an easy excuse to say, I couldn't fulfill it, so maybe Hashem doesn't want me to do it. It's not where I'm going with that. But sometimes Hashem will clearly intervene and say, this is what you want to do, but maybe right now is not the time that is appropriate for you to do that. And then our mitzvah is to follow the hand of Hashem, to let Hashem guide us towards becoming closer to him. And that's a big schus. I think there's a lot we could learn from there as well. Any thoughts on this? What do you all think of that story?
No, it's pretty, I can imagine the trauma that it must have caused the parents.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah, that was tough. I mean, kudos to them. They took it with a lot of emunah, a lot of, yeah.
I think that's amazing. I'd say from my, personal experience, sometimes, as you mentioned, you can get caught up with just lacking the enthusiasm to do something and then take the road up. It's not the time. So I guess my question is, how do you know with certainty, Hashem is saying, wait, just because the circumstances aren't right, doesn't mean wait. So how it must, as you said, take some emunah, but how do you know? If you don't want to be wrong about it, how do you know with certainty that Hashem is saying, wait?
So instead of answering your question, I'm going to make your question stronger and leave you with it.
Thank you. That's what I needed.
So interesting. I actually have this book here in hand reach that I was just reading that talks about this, but in the context of your question, it doesn't make it easier. But basically, the issue is that sometimes you can feel like you're in a catch-22, because if something is hard to do and therefore it's eluding you, it's past you to do, sometimes that might mean that it's not the right time to do it. But very often it is exactly the right time to do it. And it's the challenge and getting through the difficulty in doing so that is literally going to bring us to that greater level. So a lot of times growing Jewishly is very hard. And that's exactly the point. That's exactly what brings us to greater levels. And to mention briefly, this such a powerful idea I read in this book over here. He talks about that sometimes things might be going well spiritually, but sometimes we're going through a period that he calls katnus, which means like smallness. What is katnus? Katnus is a time that we're not in the mood. Do you ever feel when it comes spiritually, we're not in the mood? I'm not in the mood of really doing mitzvahs today or learning today. I'm not in the mood of connecting to Hashem. I'm not in the mood of coming to synagogue. And you know what? A lot of times that leads to, I'm not in the mood of anything. I'm burnt out. I'm just not interested right now. And it becomes so hard to do anything. Sometimes it could be hard to get out of bed sometimes. But, certainly we could feel we're not being, properly stimulated spiritually, and we don't have what we need. We don't have the right tools around us, and we're just like not interested anymore. So he says that there's this idea in Judaism of kol haschalas kashos, and all beginnings are hard. When we're starting to do something, it's very often very difficult. So he says this period of katnus is hard because it's the beginning of greatness. Anytime we're going through a period where things are just so difficult, this is the introduction to a whole new level of spiritual greatness that we are unlocking for ourselves. But the only way to get it is to get through this period of katnus, of you know, I don't want to say depression really, but definitely there's elements of depression in it. And it's just like, this is difficult and I'm not in the mood. And Hashem is saying, how do we react precisely to that? How are we going to get through that? Are we just going to give up and be done with it? Or are we going to try to encourage ourselves or take small steps to get out of it? And whatever, there's a longer conversation that we don't have time for. But just in terms of your question, when things are hard, very often, that's what we need to push through to unlock greatness. Very often, that's just what we need to push through. The question is, when might it be a message from Hashem that this is not for you? I'll tell you when you put in a huge amount of work to prepare for a milah and you put everything in place and the mohel says this baby is not healthy enough to get circumcised, then we know Hashem is saying this is not the right time. And then God forbid for somebody to be self-righteous enough to think that they should proceed with the circumcision would be a horrendous decision, because obviously the Torah values life above all else. So I think when there's impossible obstacles in front of us, maybe there's a clear hand of Hashem that's saying, look, I'm not going to let you do this. But when it's not so clear, I can't define this exactly. I wish I could. I wish I was a prophet enough to do that. Maybe a few more years at the Jacksonville Kollel, I'll be enough of a prophet to do that. But for now, I'm not. So, but otherwise, Hashem always wants us to push hard and to work hard, and we shouldn't be turned off and see a sign from Hashem just because it's difficult. That's for sure.